Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Well, it's good to be back. Well, I'm not exactly back, but I'm back making content. I am still out in the 50th state of the Union, a chain of islands located in the Polynesian area of the world, better known as Hawaii. That's where I'm at. Not quite the South Pacific, more or less the North Pacific. Now, I plan on continuing to make content while I'm out here. A little more difficult, but once I'm back in the Midwest United States, sometime next week, I will definitely continue on as usual. So it may be a little more sporadic in terms of content production while I'm out here, but nonetheless, I thought today was an excellent opportunity to talk about what's going on in the continued war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And within the last 24 hours, the main dam near Novo Kakhovka has been destroyed. And what does that mean? Well, it means there is going to be massive amounts of flooding downstream in this area. It is also going to make any prospective counteroffensive by the Ukrainian military in this area much more difficult. So who blew the dam up? Who has the capabilities to blow this dam? Well, I would have to say at this point, it's looking more and more like the Russians blew the dam up. Now, do the Ukrainians have the capability of blowing this dam? Possibly. But it would be a much more great undertaking for the Ukrainian military to blow up this dam. It's just not easy to blow up a dam. You have to really know what you're doing. You have to have the ability to have aircraft flying over this area in order for those aircraft to drop very large precision-guided munitions on this target. And that would be very, very difficult. Now, could the Ukrainians have been assisted by other nation states, such as the United States? Possibly. Possibly. Who would benefit from the destruction of this dam? Well, from a military aspect, the destruction of the dam could hurt and hinder both parties. Obviously, if the Ukrainians were looking at some sort of large amphibious crossing of the Dnieper River onto the eastern bank of the Dnieper River, then blowing this dam would make that operation much more difficult. For the Russians, if the Russians were looking at some sort of counteroffensive across the Dnieper River at some point, blowing this dam would make it very difficult. Not only that, some would say that blowing of this dam is going to make getting water to the Crimea that much more difficult for the Russians. Now, I'm not completely sold on that. And what I mean is, if the Russians control areas along the Dnieper River, then the ability for them to get water into the Crimea is going to be omnipresent. They're going to have that ability. Is it going to be more difficult before the dam was destroyed? Yes, it would. It would take some engineering efforts by the Russians to get that water to the south. But the water is still there. And in fact, there's probably going to be more water downstream from this area where the dam was blown up. But right now, more specifically, I think it meaning the dam being destroyed and the flooding that is occurring downstream from the Black Sea all the way north to where the dam was destroyed, it's going to become even more difficult for any sort of amphibious operation or river crossing. So it looks right now the Russians blew the dam. Now, that does not mean it is impossible that the Ukrainians could have done it as well, and are trying to blame the Russians for it. So it's very, very difficult to say. But I would say at this point it is more likely that the Russians blew the dam. And in war, this is very common. This is what happens. And as this war continues to escalate, I imagine we will see other acts that necessitate war, or the ultimate outcome of war, that the average person watching this war would find very difficult to take. Now, it does look like the Ukrainians have started some sort of large-scale military operations. The Russians are reporting the Ukrainians launched multiple battalion sets against Russian lines in the Donetsk area of operations. The Russians are also reporting that the Ukrainians took serious casualties in the early stages of this operation. Now, who are we to believe? The Ukrainians are not saying anything. They are saying everything is super secret, and they're not going to report on ongoing military operations. The Russians are saying that yes, the Ukrainians have started a fairly large offensive operation, kind of in that mid-central sector near Donetsk, and thus far it has not been effective. Now, when the Ukrainians tend to be quiet, when you don't hear a lot from the Ukrainian side, that usually means things are not going well for the Ukrainians. If you remember the operations in Kherson, the operation near Kharkiv, the Ukrainians made very quick gains, especially in Kharkov, and were very much touting military gains. Now, if the Ukrainians suffer military defeat, and it's highly likely the Ukrainians may have suffered military defeat in the last 24 to 48 hours, the Ukrainians don't talk about it. So thus, when you hear silence on the airways, and you know that there has been an uptick in fighting, on the Ukrainian side at least, then you can tell that there's a possibility that things are not going well for the Ukrainians. So look, the Russians have had a lot of time to prepare for any sort of Ukrainian counteroffensive. And in all likelihood, we're seeing what has occurred in this area because of those Russian preparations. So it'll be interesting to see over the next day or two what happens to the Ukrainians up the ante and continue an all-out offensive along the Donetsk area of operations. Do they launch other operations near Orikhiv? Is there a planned operation near Orikhiv in the Zaporizhia Oblast? Are the Ukrainians looking to launch an operation elsewhere, such as in the direction of Belgorod? Is there something that we're not seeing yet that could take place in this war? Difficult to say at this point. But again, the big news is the destruction of the Novo Kakhovka dam. Obviously, that is going to have political and international repercussions as areas start to flood, as we start to get video footage of what has happened and what has occurred and just how bad it is. But again, you've got a lot of water to the north of the Novo Kakhovka dam that has been released downstream from Novo Kakhovka all the way down to Kherson. So I'm sure fairly soon we will be seeing a lot of information about what that looks like on the ground, especially for the people that are still living in those areas. So that is it, our coverage for today. I apologize if you guys can hear noise in the background. Someone has decided to cut grass while I started my video. So unfortunate, but nonetheless, that's what we have to deal with. So look, I appreciate everyone joining today. We will have more videos very, very soon. Thanks for joining us. More to come. And as always, have a good day.